Hi, I'm Jeanne Mozier. I'm the author of this book, Berkeley Castle. And I'm here today with Rosa Pelham Suit, the woman for whom Berkeley Castle was built. She's portrayed by actress Jill Klein Rone. So nice to see you, Rosa.
Nice to be here.
When folks come to Berkeley Springs, they're always amazed to see this stone castle perched on the ridge overlooking the springs in the town. There's nothing better than a castle to generate extravagant stories of love and heartbreak and decadence and even murder. So it's fun that we're going to have Rosa here with us today to maybe give us some insights into some of the truths of these stories.
Ah, you want the truth, do you?
Now, Rosa, as I said, there's all these extravagant stories, and you can really take credit for how people have spun tall tales about you and your life at the castle.
Well, I could take credit, but I wasn't responsible for what they wrote. Of course, I lived my life as best I could, and I had a good time, and people seemed to like what they saw. Of course, once the castle was finished, which we didn't call it a castle, of course, the press started calling it a castle and started calling me Queen Rosa. As you know, at that time, a lot of the other summer cottage owners were aging. So for a young widow, with 3 small children to come to town, it livened things up, and of course my parties became legend.
Now, even though there are all these fantasy stories, there actually are some documented facts also. You began building the castle, the cottage, in 1885, and you occupied it in 1887.
For a short time, yes.
For Samuel Taylor Suit, the man, your husband, who built this for you, he occupied it for a short time. You stayed on. Taylor, as he liked to be called, as we know, he died in September 1st, 1888.
Just about a week shy of our 5th anniversary, yes.
Oh, how terrible. It's interesting, of course, all of the stories tend to be about you because you're the one who lived in the castle and you had your parties.
Oh, yes.
But Taylor was a pretty interesting man also. He was a very successful businessman. He grew rich through whiskey and railroads. He was a Maryland state senator, and his estate today is what is the town of Suitland, Maryland.
That's right.
You were his 3rd wife, and he was 30 years your senior when you married in 1883. You were 21 years old, the same age as his son, Arthur.
Yes, that's true. And then before long, we had 3 small children. We had Lula Kate, Fielder Pelham, and Samuel Taylor Jr., of course, before he then passed on. So at 5 years into our marriage, suddenly I was a young widow with 3 small children.
Yes. Now, one area with fantastic stories was how he came to build you this summer cottage that looked like a castle. There are people who say it was your bride price, the price he had to pay to marry you. Some people say it was drawn on a tablecloth here in Berkeley Springs. Others claim it was on a napkin. There are even people who claim that Taylor himself was an architect.
There are lots of claims, and when people ask me what the truth is, I say, which do you like best?
And of course, the fact is that you had been married a year and had your first child before you even came to Berkeley Springs and bought the land.
That's absolutely right.
So I guess we can feel that this being a bride price probably isn't the most accurate of the stories.
And as you know, at that time, it was popular to have summer cottages, and that's what we intended, to have our summer cottage here in Berkeley Springs.
Now, Rosa, as you said earlier, you know, here you are, you're in this aging cottage community, and you're a young widow in this fabulous building, and you were always a darling of the local press. It's how we know so much about you today. The editor of the News, which was the newspaper in town, was a Pendleton, a very old family going back to the Revolutionary War here in Berkeley Springs. So he was definitely a traveler in your cottager circles.
Yes, yes. And he did enjoy to party, as did many of the locals, along with summer guests. Oh, we had such parties. Of course, you know that Professor Anton Kaspar and his Little Bohemian Orchestra used to play at the hotel in town for about, a decade in the summertime. And when they finished at the hotel, they would go up the hill and come and play all night into the wee hours so that we could dance. And dance we did.
Now, again, there are incredible stories about some of your parties. Can we assume that you really didn't throw any of your bows off of the roof at a party?
Well, even though you really shouldn't assume, yes, you can assume that. Why waste a good bow and a good dancer, really?
Exactly. Now, one of the other parts of your life in Berkeley Springs that the newspapers love to cover were your clothes. Tell us about some of your clothes.
Well, I can thank Woody's Woodward and Lothrop, one of my favorite shopping spots, for some of the beautiful gowns that I had, black with a tail, and they were lovely. All sorts of the latest fashions I did try to keep up. And of course, a lot of the local ladies learned a bit from me and could, when they could find their way to the city, purchase their own lovely gowns too. We had some of the parties, I wish you could have seen them, all the men in their evening wear and the women in their long dresses with tails and bustles and dancing quadrilles and cotillions, polkas and waltzes. Oh, I did love to waltz.
Now, you had this castle, 16 rooms. Did you have a favorite in all of these wonderful spaces?
Well, I would have to say the Great Hall was my favorite because that's where we did the most of our dancing. Although there were times when we went to the roof and danced on the roof. And I'd been known to dance in the dining room as well, but we had many, many times where we gathered in the Great Hall on a colder night as the fall was setting in. We might have lit a fire in one of the great fireplaces. And yes, I'd have to say the Great Hall was the scene of many a fine party.
And of course, those magnificent stairs that come down lend themselves to great entrances.
Absolutely, with the train on the dress coming down. Although I didn't really like to make a spectacle of myself, I did enjoy a grand entrance.
And then there's that wonderful little circular turret room right off the Great Hall.
Oh, yes.
I'm sure there were more than one tete-a-tete that took place there.
Well, perhaps we shouldn't talk about those.
Okay, we won't talk about that. But there were rumors. And so here you are, you're this young widow, you're in this community, you're having these parties, and there were always these rumors about you and Malcolm Crichton.
Wow.
Who also had a cottage here in Berkeley Springs. But of course, he was in fact a decade younger than you were.
Oh, but he was a fine dancer. And what difference does age really make when you're friends with someone? Of course, Malcolm had two brothers. I loved to watch them do tournaments on horseback. They were very into horses. And of course, their sister Antoinette was one of my good friends. And, well, we were all friends. We had a good time together partying.
And Antoinette, in fact, ultimately married the young architect, Snowden Ashcroft, that you brought, Ashford,
yes,
that you brought from Washington to design the gatehouse for the castle.
That she did, as our family grew.
So traditional wisdom has you, what we have is we have the late 1880s, the early 1890s, you're partying, everything is really elaborate, and then financial difficulties started to intrude. Traditional wisdom has you partying away the fortune that Taylor left you.
Well, now, as you well know, the 1890s were a very I think the term today would be mixed bag. As we entered, people called it the gay 90s, of course, and there were elaborate parties, and we did have a good time, but beneath the surface, there was a steady decline. As you well know, there were a couple of recessions, depressions, I don't know. I wasn't the only one who had difficulty with financial matters. Now, of course, my father had taken over a good deal of the financial dealings and managing my properties, my Taylor's estate, as it were, after his death, so I totally trusted him. But a lot of people had financial woes, and I know after the second recession during the 1890s, and the hotels burned and the tannery shut down, of course, well, many of the idle rich became the working poor. So I did all right. I don't think that I was extravagant. I think I did the best I could, providing a good home for my children. Of course, you know, it was to me to manage things for them as well until they became of age. And so we did watch some spending. Perhaps I didn't shop quite as much as I had before, but there was always enough for governesses and tutors and taking good care of my family and providing for them.
Well, of course, you know, Taylor left you this empire that included major distilleries, but he was the distiller.
Yes, he was.
So without him, it was probably difficult for you. And as we all know, railroads in the 1890s were a total snake pit of people building competing railroads and, you know, buying and selling. So I guess you were fortunate that you had your father, Charles Pelham, there to help you with these, as well as other advisors. Now, it was certainly a challenge, no matter how much money you had, to bring up 3 young children as a widow. But you never remarried. Surely there were suitors.
Well, it was interesting, and I wish I could have gone back and asked Taylor what he was thinking. Because it was a stipulation in the will that I not remarry, or I suppose everything would have then passed to my children, and there would have been other executors. But as you well know, I was Taylor's 3rd wife, and the first 2 were largely responsible for helping him on his way to fortune and building his empire. So perhaps had I been allowed the same opportunity, I could have taken what I had and combined with someone else, and we could have, well, who knows what we could have done. But as I said, it wasn't in the will, and I did abide by that, and yeah, we did fine.
Well, let's talk about your children, because obviously they were important to you, and keeping them safe
absolutely
kept you from marrying again. I mean, you could have easily decided that, well, let them be taken care of by some, you know, other entity or another.
Well, yes, but as any mother knows, the children are the most important thing, and I did want to provide a good life. I think I did provide a good life. I know one of my biggest regrets is that Louise, Lula Kate, died. She was just 21, and we never really resolved the issues between us, so I do regret that we didn't have a better relationship.
And she died here in Morgan County and is buried out by Sleepy Creek Village.
Yes, she is.
Now, as you said earlier, Taylor's will left everything to you and your 3 children. But he asked that neither the castle nor Suitland ever be sold. Yet you eventually were forced to sell both of them at the urging of your advisors and with the encouragement of the court. Later letters from your son Fiedler, that came into our possession very recently, revealed some bitterness about this decision to sell the castle and to sell Suitland.
Well, yes.
These letters showed that Fiedler resented it, and that when you ultimately went to live with him in Idaho in the 1930s, he wrote that he really wanted you to return to Morgan County instead of staying there with him.
And I would have liked that. However, that wasn't what was to be. The decision to sell was not an easy one, but at that time, something needed to be done, and we needed to keep living. I was providing for my family, and had I not taken those steps, we might have at that time lost everything. So, as we well know, change is the only constant, and when my husband, in his infinite wisdom, wrote the terms of the will, he didn't know what the future would bring. And I want to believe that he would have approved of my doing the best thing for my family.
Well, one thing, since we're talking about the will, one thing we know is not true that people have claimed repeatedly was there was no indication in the will that you had to finish the castle in order to get any inheritance.
Oh, no. No, but I wanted to, and
Yes.
It was a good thing.
Yes, of course. So once, during the first decade of the 20th century was a very difficult one for you with your residence at the castle, and it went through bankruptcies, and it got sold. The bank took it over, and then you bought it back, and then the bank took it over again. And you ended up staying in Morgan County, and living in several different locations, out by Sleepy Creek in the southern end of the county near Oakland. You had a very strong connection with the local population. I mean, the real local population who lived out in the country, especially in your later years after you lost the castle.
Yes, I did, and I enjoyed having tea with some of the locals, and of course I raised chickens, so I always had something to trade with people, and it was a good life. It was definitely a good life. I enjoyed my time here. I didn't need to be in a grand castle up on the hill to enjoy the life that I led here with the local population.
And you, even after you moved to Idaho with your son, and you ultimately never returned to Morgan County, you still kept in touch with some of these folks.
Yes, I did.
So I think your attachment to Berkeley Springs and Morgan County was very real.
It was my home.
Yes. Well, thank you, Rosa. This has been very enlightening and lots of fun. And as you know, let me share with you, your castle is still there. It's still a vision that captures people's imaginations as they come to Berkeley Springs. But unfortunately, it's in legal limbo at the moment because of the death of the 21st century owner, Andrew Gosselin, who was a great admirer of yours and always kept your portrait in his bedroom. It's not, unfortunately, currently open to the public. Now, let me ask you one last question.
All right.
We know that you are buried in Idaho, in Coeur d'Alene, not here in Morgan County, but you don't ever come back to haunt the castle, do you?
No, but it would be fun. And when people talk about all of the stories, well, I just say, what would you like to believe? Whatever makes you happy, that's what you should believe, because that's what we did. We did what made us happy, and we had a good life here in Morgan County and Berkeley Springs at the castle.
Well, we owe you a great debt, Rosa, because of you and Taylor's love for you and both of your imaginations. We have this wonderful castle in our historic little town.
Well, and thank you for having me back to enjoy this time with you.